It's Christmas Eve. We're getting ready to polish everything up here. And what I've been doing, while Karen's upstairs cooking and preparing and making food, and I've been sneaking down here and one by one putting a coat of wax on the mold each time. And, well, it's basically the same procedure you would use when you make the mold. Now, on the end of the last video, what we did is we radiused all the edges, sanded everything smooth and clean. This is going to need now 4 coats of high temperature wax, the same as when we made the mold on the previous video. 4 coats of wax, roughly an hour apart, polished as much as possible. And then as many coats of PVA as it takes to get a nice layer, a nice thin, dry layer of PVA on there, so that the part will release. And from this point on, I mean, we hit a watershed last week in terms of having the mold complete, and now it's time. We just have to prep the mold, and probably right after Christmas we'll lay up our first parts. In Taylor and silver. Mike's ring is in raw wood, and on the last tape, the last couple days, he's put on, I think up to this point there's 5 coats of clear dope, but there are still a few spots that, because of humidity, and if you need a little rundown on what that's all about, I put some tips on the last video that I think are real helpful or useful. But we're going to let this sit in a low humidity condition. It's right under a heating vent, which is the prime objective here. Notice both of the rings, all my parts that already have a finish on them are sitting under a heating vent, so we get the minimum humidity on these, especially the foam wing parts. So anyway, that's going to sit there. We're going to work on that later. But getting this mold prepped is a giant step. And again, it's 4 coats of wax. We used a part-all high-temperature wax. Buff and clean each coat. Again, there's no point going back over that because it's going to be exactly what we did to the mold on the last video. But what that does, it allows the part to release, and in this case, even our carbon fiber ring, we had a clean release. Well, if you miss a spot or you skimp on that step, you only jeopardize or risk having all the time, energy, and money that you put into a part. If it doesn't release properly, boy, it can be very depressing. They call it a catastrophic lockup. And sometimes you lose the mold. That's even worse. Well, all the wax is on the molds for the PVA, but unfortunately, it's Christmas Day and we're not going to do anything today. We're going to feed our animals. Maybe feed our animals. But check this out now. I'm sure this is one of the things you've always asked yourself. What is it like to have Christmas Day with Wendy? Well, first thing is we get all our Christmas cards, and we generally sit at the table, which we've already done, read all our Christmas cards from our friends, and hang them up on a mirror. And Karen usually gets up about 6 hours earlier than I do. And she starts cooking giant amounts of food. What do we have today? Look at this.
Wendy, go away.
Wendy, go away. Look at these potatoes. I didn't make that much epoxy to make a mold. Look at this. What do we have here? Corn? Oh, we're going to have a big meal today. Ooh, corn? What's over here?
That's 7 stuff and like, no. You missed, that's a tart, an onion tart.
Open that refrigerator. I want to see what's in here.
There's nothing in there.
Oh, look, there's pizza pie up top.
That's
That's
pizza
potato
pie.
pan.
Potato pancakes.
I was hoping it'd be pizza.
Sweet potato pancakes.
There's our dessert. Look at this.
Trifle.
Trifle. And the final thing, now you got to believe this is why I'm shooting this early in the morning, and I'm still in my pajamas, by the way. Look at this.
So much.
We have molded butter. Karen, you've gone over the edge. And molded little Christmas trees of butter.
Christmas trees and reindeer.
And reindeer.
Nice, huh?
Yeah, that's nice molding material. Maybe I could make little, why don't you ask me, I would have made little model airplanes.
Go away, I have no makeup on, get out of here.
So, forget the makeup, it's Christmas. So here we are. Obviously nobody's here yet. We have our little village up, one of our 2 villages. She's got the table set for our company and kids that are going to come over later. Christmas with Wendy and Karen. Well, we're going to save some of this video for when the company gets here, but look at this. No wonder I get fat. Everywhere you go, there's bowls of candy. Look at this. Molded butter, though. Can you imagine? How long ago did you make these reindeer? These are nice.
Oh, about 4 or 5 years ago.
4 or 5 years ago. We still use them every year. And yes, we hope it's going to be a nice day. No snow at all. No snow. That's the only thing makes it not be like Christmas here. And we have plenty of presents to open. Yeah, some days it's just a lot of fun being windy, and today is one of them. So we're opening gifts, and this is Karen's gift. Look at this guy. I picked this guy out specifically because he's already into modeling. And he's only a year old. Look at that hat. Karen, what's his name? Miles? Look at his old booties. Dolly has booties. Now, one thing good about this doll, he's got a lot of friends around the room here.
I didn't see this. I didn't see this.
He's got girl dolls, he's got boy dolls. He's got dolls, he's got more dolls, more dolls. We're not surrounded by dolls here or anything, are we?
That's what I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to do stocking something later. Okay.
And I got the vintage airplane calendar.
Cute. It's a snuggle.
Biplanes.
Couldn't find Mr. Delicious, huh? Oh, that's fantastic.
No, look what I got him. Perfect.
Mr. Fantastic.
Nice.
Do you like the socks?
I love the socks. Thank you, baby. Nice t-shirt.
Oh, Mama's Eat the robe?
This is a Mama's Eater.
All right.
I like the
I got pajamas. Where are my pajamas?
A few years ago. Yes.
Somebody took my pajamas. Karen, where are my pajamas?
Your pajamas are on the steps. Thank you.
One of the gifts she got for me. I thought this was cute. It's real fun, and you open it up and it's all candy for going to the movies. Nice little gift. My pajamas.
Want to sleep?
I'll tell you, we've had a wonderful Christmas now. Craig and his girlfriend Michelle are in Florida, so they didn't get to share this day with us, but the rest of the day we're going to be having some friends over for what amounts to be our Christmas dinner, and I hope you enjoy sharing it with us. In an unrelated story, now that we're done eating. Now, I want everybody to understand, this is going on our permanent family record and going all over the world on my videos. So tell everybody what this is our friend Barry. She's personally saved 35 cats and she's looking for a bachelor husband. So I'm going to turn Wendy videos. And he's got to be a vet, he's got to be wealthy.
And hands-on.
Okay.
At least reasonably good looking. And under the age.
No. Forget the good looking. Does he have money? How much money does he have?
Average Joe vet.
Average Joe vet.
That could be good.
Karen, this was a wonderful Christmas. I really feel like we really did have a good time. This was a great Christmas.
We're looking for a vet that's also an
I hope you enjoyed a few minutes of it.
An underwear model. You hear that? You hear that?
I would like.
Well, we had a fabulous Christmas, but now it's time to get back to work. And today, we're going to put the same, we have the wax on the same 3 or 4 coats of PVA until we get a good coat of PVA on all the mold surfaces. We'll let that dry, and probably tomorrow the next day we'll lay up our first ports. But getting the PVA on today while it's not raining or snowing or hurricaning, this will be a big step forward, and we've done that on the previous video. So I'm just going to skip through that, but getting that smooth, even coat, it usually takes 2 or 3 coats. It's got to dry in between coats. And if you get a run, you basically have to wipe it all out with clean water, soapy water, and start all over again. But getting that wax on was nice, because to do the wax and the PVA all in one day is pretty labor intensive. So we got that done. We're ready to do the PVA. Well, today, really, the only thing we got done is to get the PVA on the molds, get it sitting, and we're going to let it dry overnight. But that's one of the necessary steps, and if we were in some kind of a big rush, well, because it's the holidays, we have a lot of other things in the house here, family-related things, so we're just going to let this sit, and the next time we come to work on it, we'll be ready to put that first layer of carbon fiber right in there, up on the new PVA. Usually in the course of every holiday season we come up here to Ridgefield Hobbies just to look at he usually has an indoor train layout and an outdoor layout, and we've already done some work videotaping this, but I wanted to see if he still got it up this year. Looks like he's added some decorations to it. Kind of a backyard layout. Something I'd love to do by my pond is have a train layout like this. LGV, but now Mike's Train House and Lionel all make these big, relatively big trains. Very cool. Anyway, they're not running. Maybe we'll get them to run them. Yeah. So I'm always looking for ideas, something I can do in my backyard. Because I can picture somewhere in the future having something like this in my backyard where Karen and I have the fish. And then when Ed Cotton comes up here, we're going to be making a trip down to Northlands, the biggest HO train layout in the world. But as long as we're up here, it was good seeing that he still got the layout up and running. In today's mail, got some cool stuff from Scott Dinger. Now, Scott Dinger, of course, made us the custom exhausts that are on the B25. He sent me this really nice little collection of stuff. But if you remember back to our video of last year's Nats, that was Scott's first Nat. And I'm reading his little letter, and he says he really had a great time. He enjoyed the article in Stunt News. I hope everybody did. Kind of a tongue-in-cheek, but certainly proved the point that Scott doesn't know how to quit. Now, I always like to look at, this is of course part of the article, I always like to look at just how some other people approach the idea of like how they built the nacelles, the mounts. Even though I do it differently, and I've come up with my own system for twin-engine planes, and it looks like we're going to be doing more of that in the near future on the A26, but just an example, here's how this person chose to make the mounts, and they got their big RC tank in there, and their gear mounts and things, so you always can get ideas, especially from somebody doing a very similar project. And that brings up another point. I have a real big collection of old magazines, both model trains and model airplanes, and I refer to them constantly. I'm always reading more, trying to memorize more. And the thing that's neat about magazines, as well as videos, of course, is you're able to share them with your friends, and they don't lose any value. When you're all done, you still have either the magazine or the video. Now, Ed Cotton and I have been sharing some model railroad videos, some model railroad magazines, and I think that's part of what makes our group a special group. Nice nose art. As an example, just the thing looking at the cowling, he has upright engines, which mean this is the reason I didn't use upright engines, because it interfered with the way this evolved. This really, on the real model, is further forward. But again, everybody's building to their own specifications, and everybody makes their own little list of things that fit their style of flying. Never underestimate just how much you can get from a magazine article, even from a model. In this case, this is a radio control model, but it doesn't matter. You can always pick up thoughts, ideas, tips, paint jobs, tricks, things you would just maybe not be aware of if you didn't have the magazines and the videos. And it's always true that, I think in my case too, everybody has something different that they want to get out of the sport. For some people, it's just competition forever, and they don't enjoy any other aspect of it. For other people, they enjoy every aspect of it. People like Dan Banjock, for instance, or Bob Zambelli have multiple things that they enjoy, including myself. I try to enjoy. I even like those jets, to tell you the truth. If somebody would write me a check, I mean, Christmas is coming next year. And to be honest, one of the things I really enjoyed in the past year, and part of making the my B-25, was how many people contributed things, how many people became part of the B-25 team, whatever you want to call it, or a group. And every one of them is listed on the nose of the plane. I don't think Scott is, though, because he made the headers after I built the plane. So you get to be on this year's plane, Scott, but not the B-25. I'm not sure. Anyway, from Scott Dinger, I hope we'll see him at the Nats again this year at the World Championships, and I hope he doesn't crash at all this time. And I'm glad he enjoyed his little piece in Stunt News. I also today spoke on the phone to Larry Fernandez. You might remember Larry Fernandez out in California, part of the Buttafuoco stunt team. He, how should we say it? He's a blast to be with, I guess. Anyway, he had this incredible P-40. It's just unbelievable. Now, this is a real P-40, of course. But it just reminded me of his P-40. And when we spoke on the phone, I said, gee, I bet you'd enjoy seeing these pictures I have of the P-40. So I can forward some of these pictures to him. But one of the things that was really neat is he's making, and this is a secret project. I don't think he wants everybody to know, so I'll just give you a little hint ahead of time what he's doing. He's making an Eindecker. It's a World War I plane with a giant Sato, very short nose, a full-scale Barbie doll type of pilot. In fact, I'm going to send him out these P-40 pictures that I have. I know he'll enjoy having these. But anyway, the thing that, when we discussed it, that I thought was really appropriate is, like me, he's interested in a lot of different facets of modeling, and really has no interest in the just ordinary competition part of the event, but he certainly loves the semi-scale part. And so we chatted for about an hour about different things he could do with the Eindecker, all the flying wires, the big wheels, how unusual and how cool it would be. So Larry, I hope you enjoy the pictures, and we look forward to seeing some pictures, or seeing he will be at the Nats with his Eindecker. One of the things that I think a lot of people really may have a little understanding of, but not a tremendous understanding of, including myself, of course, I call it the barbell effect, and I'll explain what that is as we wait for, well, we need a whole day to work on the fuselage layup, and that may be tomorrow, but we have a lot of little things to do. I want to break away and try to get a whole day ready. Well, let's pretend that this now is the CG of the plane, and if you understand this, there's a good way to test it in real life and see for yourself just how important this is. and it's one of the least understood aspects of modeling that I know about and have written about in flying models and stunt moves many times. The model balances on the center of gravity at all times. There is a center of gravity that, and as you adjust your nose weights and vertical CG and horizontal CG, but there is a CG. There is a point at which the whole model balances like a gyroscope. And let's assume that you found that spot. Now, here's what I've found to happen. You can have a model that balances at this point. And let's just use a big cardinal for a good example. Let's just say that this model is 70 ounces, so it's kind of a heavy guy. Well, what happens when you make this same model lighter? Let's say you build it at 60 ounces. What tends to happen is it becomes nose heavy, because more of the model is behind the CG than in front of it, more of the paint, more of the wood, more of everything. So what tends to happen is the model, as they get lighter, tend to get more nose heavy. And in some cases, that's a real big advantage. In some cases, no advantage at all. But to figure out what the barbell effect would be, here's what usually happens is on a lighter plane, because the total weight is different, there's less weight. Let's just call this X and Y. X and Y are lighter. Both ends of this plane, because it still balances, both ends are still light. Now the way you can see what this is like in the real world, just take a stick, take an ordinary balsa stick, and grab it by, let's assume its balance point is here, and move it real quick. And you'll notice it's easy to stop it right on the line, or like a karate move. It's easy to pick a spot. Now take and put some lead weights on both ends, or put clay, or use a hammer. A hammer is a good example. Try to do that with a hammer, where you find out you do this. And so what typically happens is, and it's my feeling that for a given CG, and let's pretend we know the CG on this wing is 15% or 18% or 20%, that there's really an advantage to having, even if the total weight doesn't change, having less weight at the extremities, having less weight in the nose and a lighter tail. And what that gives us is a plane that maybe is the same overall weight, but there's less weight at the extremes, so it tends to maneuver quicker and tends to stop quicker. A good example on a wing over pullout, a nice sharp pullout and it stops. Well, if a plane pulls out and it's unstable, then you usually wind up moving a CG forward or shortening the handle or any other things, when in reality, if you could lighten up both ends of this, well, gee whiz, you can pretty much figure out how that works. There's an advantage there. Now, on the A2060, the advantage is that the noses, even though we have two of them, are very short. And this brings me to my point. We have two very short noses. We have double the amount of weight, but they're on a short moment. So in essence, it's pretty much a trade-off that should be exactly the same, because a heavy weight in short and a lightweight out here, when you consider the barbell effect, come out to be pretty much the same thing. But there's some thought that if you possibly can, when you're building a plane, try to make stabbing elevators and the parts up here that they're as light as realistically possible. And by having these two weights relatively light, even at the penalty of having some extra weight in the center of the plane. Let's say, and Big Jim Greenaway used to tell me this all the time, he'd say it was almost irrelevant how much the wing weighed, because the wing was right on the center of gravity. But a really good plane, any of the good planes that Jim had over the years, had lightweight noses, lightweight tails, and the wing was less important. The least important part of the whole plane was how much the wing weighed. But to keep that barbell effect and keep the extremities light, that was a big part of what was happening. And I guess we've all had our own opinion of what's happening, but then I look back at the best planes I've had over the years, and they've all had a combination of really light tails and light extremities and they all had that really nice hard corner, and then that ability to stop. And you can see that in videos, you can see that in real life, you can see it in your mind when a plane isn't even flying. Just to make an example up of something that Larry Fernandez, and this is the whole reason I started this discussion, he was asking me a question. Let's start with a Nobler. Center of gravity's here, and you build your lightest tail, and you know that engine that goes up here, you're going to have some relationship there that makes sense, and that we all know Noblers fly very well. Well, I didn't know when I made the Typhoon, which has an extremely short nose, because I had a 91 in it. Remember, this nose was very short. So X was very short, Y was very long. But I had more weight, so I had a heavier weight closer to the CG. Now, in Larry's case, it's going to be even more because he's got the engine mounted right up on the firewall, right up on the front of the wing. This is going to be like an extreme case of short nose with a relatively heavy motor and a very long tail. Y is going to be even longer. Actually, Y should be off the CG. But the point is this. You can have this scenario. You know this is going to result in a good combination of forces. When you go to a shorter, heavier nose and or a longer tail, what you want to keep in mind is there's a proportion. You want this force arrangement to match this force arrangement. So in this case, we had, instead of having let's just say a 12 ounce engine, we had a 17 ounce engine, and the shorter nose, the result was that it's still balanced, and it still gave the effect of having the forces were still the same. Now, where you'd have a problem here is if we built the Typhoon with a normal nose, probably would have been an unflyable airplane. Or if you build a Nobler with a real short nose and a light engine, it's probably going to be unflyable. So I really look forward to trying to help Larry in his quest here, something radically different with the Eindecker, of ultra short nose. Now, Bill Netzband and Keith Trossel both helped me figure out some of the relationship here. But one of the things you gain, and people are finding this out with four-cycle engines, is a heavier motor mounted closer to the wing. The forces of the prop are less than a big prop on a short moment arm gives you a lot more drive than a small prop on a long moment arm. Now, this is going to be really significant in the time to come, because F2B, at some point in time, F2B is going to have unlimited displacement. In fact, I think it's already in effect. And what we're going to try to be working on is bigger displacement engines that get friendlier and make more torque, and you don't miss needle settings, which are going to be driving bigger props at slower RPM and be a lot quieter. But this is where the event is going, in my opinion. And the people that have transitioned, this is the transition point, is at one point it was a two-cycle world, and maybe I had something to do with convincing people 4 cycles were worth trying. But certainly, and Paul Walker gets a big chunk of that credit too. Here's where we're ultimately going, though, is we're going to be going to, and I think my vision is always pretty clear, is we're going to be going to engines of much bigger displacement that run at lower RPMs with bigger props. This is where RC pattern is right now. The planes ultimately weigh the same. The barbell effect is exactly the same, but if you look at them, they have very short noses, relatively long tails, and this is the challenge for the future, is the evolution of planes, and Larry's probably going to be on the cutting edge of that. Larry's probably one of the ones that is going to find some performance that very few of us have experienced somewhere down the road. So I look forward to working with Larry. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm, again, thanking Bill Netzband, Keith Trossel, all the people that helped me figure out, Dave Downey, of course, the aerodynamic forces of things that let my little knowledge of the sport evolve. This has really been a significant thing, and this, I believe, truly believe, this is where the event is headed. Now this brings me up to my next point, and this is really a point that I think if everybody understands it, it just makes it more fun and more interesting. Most really semi-scale planes, if you draw them out in exact scale, you'll notice they have really short noses relative to the tail moment. I mean, they're not anywhere near in proportion when they're scale. If you look at Billy Woolridge's P-47 with the 2-cycle 65, the nose has to be longer to balance the plane. So in essence, it takes it and makes it less scale. What I think is going to happen, and again, my vision, who knows about my vision anyway, having bigger, heavier engines that run at more scale speeds and sound softer, what these are going to do, I think, in the future is make it practical to make much more scale planes. I mean, Al Raby, I think just, if he was at the time of his career when he was flying and building every day, I think he just loved this time that's coming up. Real scale Mustangs, I think, are not that far away. I think even Paul Walker proved that you can get the nose. I think Paul's is 9 inches, but I'm not sure. But every time you can shorten the nose, the plane gets more and more scale. And that's what's exciting about what we do is there's always a direction that the event seems to be headed in. I mean, we all went through a time when the event looked like everybody was going to be flying a Sabre jet. Then everybody was going to be flying a white airplane. Then the planes started getting bigger and bigger. And there's every trend in the world. Then they started making more semi-scale planes. But I think thanks in part to F2B changing, I think the whole thing is going to definitely go in that direction. And what it's going to do is make possible some really, really exciting models that wouldn't otherwise be possible. And that's one of the things I personally really look forward to, is seeing some of the creative stuff. Now, we're going to be going to the World Championships. I'll bet a lot of these guys already have a little bit of a head start down that road. But no matter what you design or how you design it, you always have to take into account that barbell effect and keep that relationship to what we know is within the parameters that work. If the plane balances at between 15 and 20% of the mean average chord, you know you're going to have a good shot at having a really good flying plane. Now, just as a matter of an extreme example, look how short this would be on a scale B25. Of course, you have to account this is double, but it's not. The relationship is much better. So anyway, just some thoughts, some things that may help you design your own plane, or at least get a little jump on things that you'll enjoy doing. And how could you ever forget the Bearcat? One of the planes way ahead of its time. Anyway, back to the shop, back to the endless supply of things we have to do to keep the trains on the track here. Well, what I did the day before the layup here, I tried to get the molds prepped. Of course, the PVA is dry for sure. Made some little blocks and epoxied them in place so that the molds will stay in this position while we're working on them. And this was, of course, one of the things that I need to have is the mold to be perfectly stable while I'm laying this up. Make sure there aren't any spots where there was no PVA. What we want to do, I'm trying to use this material efficiently. This is the heavier of the carbon cloths. Dave has most of this up by him. He's making the fuselage for his carbon plane, but I want to lay this out. And I think I'll just need one little piece in the back here and I'll be able to do this. Now, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to do the test piece without a vacuum bag. I don't have the vacuum pump here at this time, and I just want to run a test piece and see how this mold is going to lay up. And in this case, I'm going to have to pre-cut the material In fact, I guess I don't have much of a choice. There's no point. I'm going to have to do it in 2 pieces because we don't have a full-length piece of material. But I want to make the test piece just to see if I'm going to be happy with the rigidity, since we'll probably add something, ribs or Nomex or something. But first we need to make what amounts to be a test shell, and that's what I'm going to be doing today. And if I have the time, I'll make the shell for both parts. Be done with that. But what you can see right away is I want to pre-form this in here once I get this wet out. And we need a piece in the back. But always, good tip, always have the material pre-cut. I have the temperature turned way down in the shop, so I'll have plenty of working time with the resin too. And I got to find a piece, maybe from scrap, or cut a piece for that little piece back there. As always, I'm stirring the resin 2 minutes longer than I think it really needs to be stirred. In this case, with the shop conditions cold, we should have plenty of time to work on this. But again, because we're making our first test part, I want to see I've never laid this particular mold up. I want to get some idea of how this is going to lay out. And there's no real easy way to do this other than to just do it. In this case, start at one end of the mold. I may need a little piece up in the nose here. And we're going to find out right away. Once this part starts to get tacky and sticky, then we'll slit all the edges, slit all the corners and edges. It's actually a pretty similar part to the bottom. Notice by the way, whenever I'm doing a mold, I do the smallest of the 2 parts first. Don't start with the big complicated one. Start with the relatively simple one. And I'm just forcing the resin down through the material. Now I may need to use 2 layers of this. I may find out that this piece is too heavy already with 1 thick layer. I don't know. Until I make a test part, I'm really not going to know. And since I have to make 2 of everything at this point in time, I can afford to do kind of a little experiment on the first part and then fine-tune the second part. But this is the routine that I need to do, is just constantly pushing down the resin down through the material. Make sure I get the edge laid up, that it's plenty wet. The big part is going to be a little more complicated to do, so I hope I'm going to be able to get kind of in the mood here, or fine-tuned, or whatever you want to call it, before we actually do that part. Now in the back here, where we have the joint, it's going to get a little tricky. And I guess like everything in life, there's just no substitute for just going out and doing it. Now Midgley had done a little research, and he's planning on coming down soon. He's got some new resin that he wants to try, some ProSet variation for his wing mold. The plane that we made parts for in the last time he was here is pretty much finished. Woody's been working on it. And that's his 3rd carbon fiber plane, so each time we do one, we're learning something. Now let's look at this up close. It's just a question of pushing that resin down through the material. Because we don't have a vacuum bag. If we had a vacuum bag, this would be a whole lot different, but right now our pump is up in New Hampshire. But it won't be a whole lot different. It won't be night and day different. You can always make parts without a vacuum pump. Just got to be really careful about not getting a lot of extra resin in the mix. Now see any of the hairs come out? I'm going to pull them out one by one. Most important that resin gets pushed down through the material, just like similar to making a tune pipe. In essence, we're making a big giant tune pipe. Yeah, when you vacuum bag in a part like this, of course you put in a little bit of that bleeder cloth and it bleeds out all the extra resin. If you're doing the poor man's method, which is what we're doing on this test part, and I'm not so sure that, how much you gain by vacuum bagging it. I'm sure you gain some, but in this case, not having a pump makes all the difference in the world. So anyway, what we want to do is just by constantly moving the towels or toilet paper works good too, by the way, we're pressing in as this resin kicks, and we have a window of about 45 minutes where this is going to start gelling up. We're just going to keep pressing away at it and try to blot up any of the extra resin. And this really is more effective than you think it is. Just labor intensive. The vacuum bag makes the making it apart a lot quicker. You save this hour of babysitting because you just put it in a bag and walk away. Where here, what I'll do is for this hour, I'll just sit and monitor this. And because we have a cool temperature, this should take 45 minutes to an hour at this temperature. The one thing you don't want to have is hot. Hot makes that resin kick off way too quick. And we'll find out what that resin that Midgley's getting, some tricked out 125 resin. We'll find out if that's going to be any improvement. Once I have a test part and I can see how strong it is and what the weight is, I'll be all set. We were trying to see which worked best, the toilet paper or the paper towels, and actually I couldn't see a whole lot of difference. But we managed to blot out enough. You can see the texture on this part. We've got almost all the resin out. Now I would suspect if we had the vacuum bag and all the extra work that's involved in vacuum bagging, we probably could get this a gram or two or maybe 3, I'm not sure, lighter, but I think this is going to be perfectly acceptable. And the thing with this is really relatively easy to do. It's a lot of labor, but it's easy labor. With a vacuum bag, it gets complicated, and you need a lot of pumps and fittings and everything. So this will be an interesting test once this part cures out. And I'll do the other one off camera. The other one is going to be exactly the same. Not a whole lot of difference, except the material will be bigger and probably need a splice right about at the same spot. But if we get these both laid up, boy, I can't wait to pull these parts out. Anyway, that was a good little trick. The toilet paper, the paper towels, some of the scraps. Now what I do at the end of laying one part up is clean all the parts, clean them all up with alcohol. Never, and this is a big never, never take the old cup with the epoxy in it and mix it. Use a brand new cup, because that epoxy is already 45 minutes, an hour into its being cured, and that can really be a problem. So the next step is going to be, and I'll do this off camera because it's very redundant, and I know some people don't have any interest in molding at all, but the ones that do, to see some of the ways things are done and the way I've tried to make this work. And for instance, with the cowls, they're looking like just about as nice as anything. The little nose pieces are done. Our ring and silver is drying up, the tail is drying up. So we are really looking forward to pulling these parts out in the next couple of days, and we will be very excited. Now, the next decision I need to make is, once I pull these parts out, how I'm going to put the formers in for the take-apart system, how I'm going to lay out well, among other things, there's got to be some formers to hold the nose wheel, some to have the take-apart hatch in the back. So I haven't figured that out yet. That's something I'm just going to be working on in the next couple of days. I thought this was going to be a little more difficult than it actually turned out to be, but like everything, we're learning as we go. That'll be interesting once this part cures. Now I got the first part up by the heating vent here. As soon as that tacks out, we'll switch. And this stuff laid out pretty well with pulling out that epoxy with the paper towels and toilet paper. That may be a trick worth knowing. Now today what we want to do is look at Mike Costello's wing. He may be stopping by, but I wanted to look at it because it's been sitting in our cellar where the dampness is minimum, and because he's got dope on it, it looks 100% better than it did when he had no dope on it. It was just picking up moisture instantly and rippling the ring in spots. Now, I don't know if he's going to be satisfied with this, but what I think he could really do is, if he wants to, if there are any spots on here that he's unhappy with, he can either put a little, I think he had a hypodermic needle, and eject some epoxy in there, or if he really wants to, he can slit the sheeting and shove epoxy under each side. Again, when he gets here, we're going to look at what some of these fixes might be, but what happened here is he had let this wing sit in a very damp area for months, and it just picked up a lot of moisture, so we're going to look to try to get this fixed for him if we can. Mike and I have done is we've spent quite a bit of time looking this over, and what has happened, again, because it's in a very low humidity, the top part of this is just about as good as it gets. At the bottom we have one area and it's probably going to get covered by the nacelle anyway, but what we thought was, while we have it here and we have this incredibly nice day, we may as well just quickly tissue it and take it outside. Now, this is what I'm trying to get at. Let me just find my little block. There's my little guy. When I get to this point, I want to sand this flat, but I don't want to remove a lot of material. So all I'm going to do, Mike is out getting a tissue, I just want to kill the high spots. I want to only go front to back. And again, we only have the problem with the bottom, really. The top seems fine. I want to show Mike how to do this. Now luckily, one of the spots that we're concerned with is probably going to be under the nacelle. We're not even going to see it. This is the worst one right here. Concerned with the tips right here. This is fine. You got tissue, Mike? Yeah. I think all you need is like 5 minutes on each panel here. And we get the dope right on it. 6 will be enough. You don't need more than 6. But this is what I was doing, watch. When you get your coat off, watch. Don't sand this direction at all. Oh. Do the whole thing, front to back, and don't go crazy. All you want to do is get light pressure. Light pressure. I don't want to make any. I don't want to take all the dope off the wood either. And this is really the only panel. It's the outer panel. So what the hell? Even if you put an extra coat of tissue out here, you won't need that much tip weight, you know? It's when the top of the outboard panel is there that you go crazy. Alright, so what you do, I'll get the dope ready. Get this kind of sanded out. I'll get some newspaper out here. We should be able to knock this out. Boy, are we fast.
We gotta do it outside though, right?
Yeah, we're gonna do it on a table. But I want to sand it in here. I want to get the rest of this sanded. I'm more comfortable with some other method.
Yeah, I use a piece of sandpaper.
Okay.
Because that way I get a nice fuzzy edge.
Okay. You got that dope down?
Yes.
Okay. I just press it down with my bare hand. That's the whole secret. Bare hands. Everybody sees that. They call me the butcher, but it works.
No, that's the way you do it.
No. That was old Harold Price used to do that, barehanded. You get plenty on there.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, now you got the leading edge too?
No, I didn't do the leading edge.
Okay, let's flip it this way. I can hold it for you. do the same thing. And I always like to let it overlap by at least 1/4 of an inch. If you want, we'll do the whole top. You know what I'm saying? And then, well, you actually, the way with this, it's not really going to dry in 20 minutes. It'll be dry. Time you do the other side, this side will be dry. Okay. And just leave the tips for last. We don't really care about the tips right now because the span is so long. Okay, now flip it and let's do the other side. We're using Windex on the tissue. You get this good and wet.
Oh, where are you talking about? Oh, on this.
I want to see it from here to the tip. Wet. I'll go cut the tissue and get it Windexed.
Wait a second. Are we going to dress off the excess?
Do them both at the same time. Then you let one side dry. Now what Mike is doing, getting this whole thing good and wet. And we've been rubbing it down with our bare hands. Where he's got the tissue, then we're going to let one side dry and trim it off. And hopefully get this hold on. We're working against time because it's getting dark and it's getting cold. So even though we've had a nice day, what do you think? It was like 60 degrees before?
Almost.
It was ridiculous. I know that. Karen and I went for a walk. It was like California or something. Good and wet. Plenty of dope. Don't try to. Right now, that's going to be holding the whole tissue down. That coat that you're putting on right now. I'll go get the wonderful tissue, baby. The reason I use Windex instead of just plain water is it doesn't soak into the wood as much, especially on a foam wing.
I use Windex too.
Use Windex too?
Actually, I use Windex 50-50 with water.
Okay.
But that's a lot.
The idea is to get it, as soon as you get it laying down, that you don't have that moisture going into the wing. Even if it's a D-tube or an I-beam or something. And the biggest mistake, don't be cheap putting on that dope.
All right, that's good.
Okay, grab one in here. Move this up, 1 second. Okay, lay it down.
You're going to overlap the same way over
Yeah,
here?
same overlap. Then you put a separate piece on the pick. You get your side down.
Okay, it's very much down.
Okay.
Slit it for that.
Do your slit. I can pull this wrinkle out up here.
While you're doing that, I'll get this one end started. Oh, I can't bend over like that for very long. Oof.
You need a little up there. Past here, you can slit that too. Okay, pull it out. But this, get a notch there so that doesn't make a bow. I'm getting plenty on here. You press it down. I'll do it with my bare hands. My hands are nice and dirty. Okay, you want to work on the front end? I want to use this. Yeah. Get the middle there. And then as soon as you're done, get the tissue trimmed around the tips and stuff. I got 99% of it. And it's nice and wet. That's going to be nice and soft. Okay. And then, of course, here's the real trick Karen likes. Wipe it on your shirt so your shirt stinks like rack dope too. That's the part all wives love us for. You could just trim that out. Oh, you're going to wrap it, right?
Yeah.
All right, let me get the phone. You're going to work on that. Mike, you know, that makes a nice cut.
Yeah, because you don't, it just blends into nothing.
Yeah, that cut, you get a nice fuzzy edge by cutting it like that, and you can just get the dope right on it. Very nice. This guy knows his stuff. Bomber Pilot Supreme. He is the El Supremo of tissue.
It's my favorite thing.
So this is a new technique that Mike is showing me, and it works great. Now the thing is, as soon as you finish sanding and let's do the other side of the wing.
Oh, yeah, we got it.
I want to see how fast you can work, because Mike is a real craftsman, but he's not as fast as Windy.
Now, this
But then nobody is.
takes more time.
You know what Orson Welles said when he made Citizen Kane? They said he never made another movie like Citizen Kane, but then nobody else did either, so it was okay. Yeah, it takes time, but hey, it's worth it. We got these two bombers out at the field. Mike, the first day you fly this thing, believe me, these days of freezing out here are going to go just disappear into the woods. And you're going to have those guys, the guys in the club are jealous of you already. Imagine they're going to hate you as much as they hate me. As soon as you have a nice plane, everybody hates you, you notice that? You buy a new car, everybody hates you. Unbelievable.
What will we do without friends like that?
Yeah, well that's the way it is in this hobby. Okay. That's a nice technique. I'm glad you put that up on for everybody to see. I like that. I will give that a try to myself. Now you're going to feather that edge in with clear dope now, right?
Right, and then it disappears.
Okay, feather that in.
As opposed to a razor.
And I'll go, okay, good. Always room to learn. Get plenty on there, I would anyway. Now you're going to bring the leading edge around the other side a quarter of an inch.
Same thing.
Okay, good idea. I am in total agreement with that. Okay. And then while you're doping the rest of this, I'll go wet up the rest of the tissue with Windex. We'll get this done. As the sun sets in the west.
This goes a lot faster with a second person.
Yeah, no kidding. So I was thinking you should come work for me for no salary. And then I'll work for you and you pay me full salary.
Oh, that sounds fair.
That's fair.
Let's do it the windy way.
The windy way. You work for me, you don't get anything. I work for you, I get paid. That's a good deal. All right, wet that up. I'm going to go get the other tissue. You're looking good, my man.
You know what? I'll just do this whole wing while I'm doing it.
Yeah, it won't hurt. You got everything upside, and he's not messing up my driveway either. Karen's gonna kill him when he sees all these scraps out here. Boy.
Karen loves me too much.
Up till today. Now again, we have the heat on high in the house. And we've got Mike's wing right under a heating vent, where we're going to just leave it for now, and then maybe in a couple hours flip it. So we're trying to get all the moisture and all the sheeting to lay back down the way we hope it will. Now if it doesn't, and if the sheeting comes up later on in the finish, we're going to either inject it with a hypodermic needle and some epoxy, or slit it and put some epoxy. Mike doesn't want to do that as of right now, but in the meantime, you know, and I'm just happy my wing seems to be nice and stable sitting under that heating vent. We're hopefully going to get some more finish on Mike's. But we got an interesting piece in today's mail I wanted to share with you. I got this from Floyd Carter. I'm assuming this is his full-size plane. He didn't say, he just sent it to me with a note. But the note doesn't say whether this is, he owns it, he built it, both. He's flying it and he's going to jump out with a parachute or what, but Floyd, hey, I'm impressed. I love biplanes. And I guess if I ever lost interest in the sport of control line, I would start building a plane the next day, probably. Anyway, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. I'll hang this up in the shop. From Floyd Carter. Today I just had a little bit of time, and I thought one of the things I could try to do, this has been curing for 2 days up by the heat, to see what kind of a release we're going to get from this. Now, you know, let's hope we're going to get a good release. Usually the way you can tell, let me throw this up on the camera, when your PVA is just about the way it should be, you get like what there looks like saran wrap as you pull off one little piece, and that usually lets you know well, it doesn't really let you know anything, but it's kind of a hint that things are going to go your way. I'm not sure they're going to go our way, but I want to pull these apart. Now with a shell this thin, really the trick is to just pre-release all the edges there as gradually as possible, and you can see what I'm doing is just picking up little by little. What we don't want to do is tear it out. We want to try to release it by folding it back, if possible. And by looking in, I can see that I'm pulling up all the PVA out of the mold, which means the wax cured. Remember, we spent really a lot of extra time doing that. But this is a critical step. This is a step where you can get frustrated if it doesn't want to release right away. Or you start, in my case, I lose sleep wondering if it's ever going to come out. Because if the piece ruins the mold right now, we have to go back and carve another plug. We don't have the plug anymore. Now it's kind of sticking right in that curve, which I expected. And again, now I have to decide, once I get these pieces out and weigh them, here it comes, it kind of releases little by little. Once I get these pieces out, weigh them, way up in the front, it doesn't want to, there we go, okay. Okay, oh my God, looks good. You were there for this moment in history. Now, it could be a lot of things. Let me show it up close. One of the things, of course, we have the PVA attached, if you can see. And this usually means we have a good wax coat on there. Now, before we lay up another part, we'll wax it again. But I have that PVA. Now, if you can look at that finish, now you can picture that's the PVA on the finish. We're going to have to sand that off, of course. The reason we want it smooth and shiny is so we get a good release. Now I'm looking around, it won't even matter about the edges here because we're going to fill those edges and put 64th plywood. There's our Kevlar string that's on the end of the material. I'm just guessing by looking at this piece, it sure doesn't feel too heavy, but that's not an indication of what the weight is. It's got to be trimmed, it's got to be sanded, it's got to be in every way prepared, but I think just looking at it, I think we're plenty rigid. One layer of this material will be fine. So what I'll do is I'll call Midgley, have him send me enough to make Mike's fuselage. That certainly looks, that's about as good as it gets. And I'm just guessing, you know, if we were going to build a plane with no finish, you could probably leave that finish on there. And that day may be coming when we do something like that. But right now, having that finish, at least right now, that we have the part, it comes out of the mold clean. Now see how nice and clean it came out? You can see the PVA along the edge. This is what's supposed to happen. And here's a little trick that I used, is if you're in doubt, spray the PVA on the mold, and then go back, wait, let it dry 45 minutes, and try to peel it up. And if you don't have a nice clear sheet coming up, you either won't get that finish or the part may stick in spots. To clear the rest of this mold out, we're going to wash it down, get the rest of the PVA off, re-wax it because it's a new mold now. It's not, they call this a green mold, a new mold. When it's new, you have to wax it, or you should wax it every time. And we'll give that 4 coats, about an hour between coats, before we lay up a second part. But I just think anybody out there that can see the quality of that part, I don't think it gets a whole lot better than that. I think we can really take some pride in the fact that this is a mold that it's taken us years to develop this technology, or to get comfortable using it. And I think the thing I'm happiest most of all is that I've been able to pass a lot of it on to other people. Now we're going to do the same thing with the other mold. The other mold is still sitting up by the heat. The longer it sits by the heat, the better. We'll do the same thing with the other mold, and then we'll kind of get a rough idea of how these parts are going to lay out. The bigger of the two molds, again, I just had a battery go dead here, so there may be a glitch in it. I checked the PVA from this mold. Looks good, but again, that's only a clue as to if this is going to come out clean. This is a much bigger part, and when you have more of a curve, the more difficult it is to get it to release. And what I'm trying to do is release it little by little. Never be tempted to just rip it out. Just keep working it little by little. If it doesn't seem like it's happy coming out, a nice bath in hot water usually will soften the PVA. This is one of the parts that a couple of people that have done this have had trouble getting the part out the first time. And usually that's the wax. The time you spend waxing and the PVA time is your right now, you're glad you put that extra couple hours into it. And you've got to release it little by little. You just can't take one end and pull it out. It's just not that solid of a part at this point in time. The old PVA tearing at the back, that's a good thing. It looks like we have an absolute minimum of imperfections, maybe one right here. And these are easy to fix. These are things where we just didn't get enough epoxy shoved down. Let me show this up close. Just isn't enough epoxy down in there. And we can fix that. That's not a problem. Not a problem at all. So the next thing is with these parts and molds, I'm going to take everything over to the sink and just totally clean them up. I want to get all the PVA off, and you can see how the PVA just comes off like sheets. If you wanted to, you could do it this way. The easiest way is just use water. But this tells you that you have a good coat of, and you can pull the PVA up like this, and you can still have that finish on there. Wow. And that's the finish underneath the PVA, and you can see we can pull up some of the PVA. And we still have a really, really nice finish. Now the spots that are going to need correction, there's a little spot up here that's going to need some correction. I'm not worried about things like that, because this has got to be sanded. You're not going to get paint to stick to something that shiny. We got a little spot here, and what this is, I just didn't have the epoxy pressed down hard enough, and I can just fill that with a little thing of Aeropoxy Light. Right around here, you can see where the PVA has just coming off like that, and that's the key. The joint is absolutely beautiful. You can't even tell where the joint is if you didn't see that thread. And this is the flaw we have is right here. We're a little bit dry, so what I'll do is, again, when we get sanding this will have little pinholes in it, a little bit of Aeropoxy Light. But other than that, if you look at these parts, I mean, I'm just looking at these parts and I'm wondering, I got the canopy shaped just about the way I wanted it. And I got to tell you, I'm real happy the way this, for the first pull on a mold, I'm not real concerned with the weight yet because I can sand a lot of this down, sand a lot off. And I still have to decide how I'm going to lay out the take apart features and things like that, but that's a pretty good way to start the first pull of a mold, is to get a nice piece out like that. That was very encouraging. On the B-25, the all-wood fuselage, I thought, and because it was the first of the series of these planes, I think I overbuilt it. I think it's just got a lot more wood than it needs, and it certainly has a lot more reinforcements and formers and bulkheads, and we're going to look at really trying to lighten these parts up to upgrade what we're doing and get this A-26 to be hopefully either as good a performer or even a better performer than the B-25 is. And even if it just comes out as a tie, we'll have a lot of enjoyable flights out of it, and so will Mike Costello when he gets his finished. And speaking to Mike today, Mike is totally committed to making his A-26 the black the variation where it's black and it has the shark's teeth. And so what I suggested to him is once we get some more clear on that wing, we start putting some black in the filler. You can really use any color, but just put a little black in there. So the objective is, if you sand through a spot, where there's a little high spot, the filler underneath is black. It's not silver or white or whatever. Now I wouldn't do that if I was going to paint the plane silver. I'd put silver filler in there. And the silver, I think, may even show the mistakes a little better, but in Mike's case, I think we're going to use the black filler method, and that's something you can use even if you're going to paint a plane a dark color, a dark blue. You can start putting a filler in that color right from the get-go. And of course the body, you won't have to worry about that. He can just sand it. We're going to obviously put some tissue on it and really look at the possibility of cutting down some of the weight. This is the part that I was looking to get maybe 2 or 3 ounces off of what the B25 weighed, and I think I'm going down that road right now. Now I have to really think out how I want to engineer up the nose wheel mount, the take-apart features, the finish, the formers, and the take-apart piece on the tail. And that's what we'll be doing in the next couple of days. Well, in our case, we've certainly put a lot of time into making these plugs and to prepping them and getting the PVA in properly and getting all the things the way we wanted them. But when you think of the result and you think we now have the choice of we can make a part for Mike, number one, or for anybody else that wants to make an A26. We can also add this to our database so that in the future, models that we make, fuselage that we make, wings that we make, parts that we make, every time we put a little piece of knowledge into that database, we get closer and closer to having that ultimate, what Dave Midgley wants to have even more than me, that all carbon fiber plane that hopefully will be the next level from where we are with the wood planes. And if it isn't, even if it's a tie, it's going to be no worse than Miss Ashley, and that's, in my case, I think one of the planes I've enjoyed more than any other plane to fly, easy to fly, been competitive, and it's just been a real fun plane to have year after year after year. It withstands the test of time. That's what we're looking forward for the A26 and the B25 is somewhere down the road, somewhere in our lifetime, to show up at the field with two bombers, if we can ever get a truck big enough, or a van or a trailer. But just imagine, I mean, I just live for the time that both of those engines are running and I'm at the other end of the handle. And maybe you do too. But even if you don't, it is just a thrill beyond anything I can tell you. Anyway, we're going to clean up these molds. That's the next step. Now in the past, one of the steps I haven't really done as well as I should is getting all the PVA. I want to get the old PVA off. I want to clean the mold a little bit, maybe even polish it a little more with the wax. But I have to go back through the whole step. The 4 steps of waxing and the multiple coats of PVA. And once I do that, now see there's a couple of spots where it's sticking here, where I just didn't get enough wax on it. A good trick is I have this brush that I use with relatively stiff bristle. I don't want to scratch it. I don't want to take a gouge or a sandpaper or something, but I want to carefully get all of this off. Cleaning up the mold. Right now I want to be patient, because remember right now this mold, after all the time and energy I've put in it, I basically have a tool that I can make part after part after part over and over and over, and possibly as we find better materials, different resins, do experiments, it can only get better from this point on, because we can always go back to what we have on the Typhoon, Miss Ashley, and those planes I thought were as good as it gets. They were certainly as good as any all-wood plane I've had, and I just love the challenge. Up here we have the challenge of coming up with new things. I just hate when my involvement in the sport becomes Groundhog Day. And I've been there before, and I'm doing something I've done 16 times already. That's when it really gets boring. To me, it's got to be new, it's got to be exciting, or there's no point even doing it. And I'm glad that Les Emmett shares my enthusiasm for these projects, because if you were just doing things to compete, if your only motive was, I just need a plane to go compete, well, hell, just go build a wood plane. But when you want that challenge, when you want that extra little bit, when you want that thing where when you wake up in the morning you're just excited as can be and you can't wait to get down to the shop or the flying field, then you need something, I guess, at least I do anyway, something exciting. Well, I'm going to get the rest of this little bit off, I'll do this off camera, repolish these. I'll do the same thing to the parts. I need to soak the parts, get all the PVA off before I can sand them and trim them. Now, as I'm polishing out the mold, there's a couple of little things I thought I'd put on the video. Once you've made a part, each time you use the mold, in essence, you're tearing away molecules from the skin, so it gets smoother and smoother and smoother, and the parts release from a cured mold, a mold that's released hundreds of parts, like the carbon fiber gear mold, they release beautifully. When a mold is new, you absolutely have to polish it, at least if you want to be safe, and considering how much time I have invested in this mold, I really don't want to take any chance at all that I'm going to pull up a chunk of it, or that some part of it is going to be less than the best I can make it. I mean, I'm really hoping the A26 is going to be a plane that I'll have till the day I die. I like all these planes, and maybe someday they'll wind up in a Brodak museum or something. And I'm going to wind up out in that cornfield there with Don Dixon, where the memorial is. But someday we're all going to wind up at Brodak's. We'll all be living in Pennsylvania, I guess. But anyway, you cannot skimp on this part of it. An hour between coats, and to really, really not skimp in any way. And then what they recommend is on the last coat of the 4 coats of wax, take a rag that once you're done polishing it, take a rag that has never had wax on it and polish it with that to get off all of the molecules of wax. Now, what I always thought, and this is the reason I'm putting this on tape, what I always thought was that the more wax you put on, the better. Not really. It's the more you can take off that you get that polished surface that releases. And this part released beautifully, but hey, I don't want to start making the parts worse and worse. I want them to be better and better. And we probably could have, had we had the vacuum pump here, maybe made a little bit lighter part. I don't know. We're going to find out. But this is the step that everybody seems to want to skimp on. And there just is no skimping. It's just like polishing a car or buffing out a plane. There's no substitute for just spending the time. Now, in between coats of wax, let me just put a little storyboard on about how we're going to try to do the finish on this, and why we've developed this little system that we have for putting the finish on these carbon parts. I think some of this will be interesting. Some of it is just good common sense. And one of the things we realized early on, and I had made the first couple of parts, if you took a cross-section of a carbon fiber part, it's going to look pretty much like this. There's going to be a layer of raw resin, and then there's going to be the matrix of carbon. And you can somehow minimize this layer, this surface layer of resin. You can somehow minimize that by vacuum bagging the part. But what happens then is the part itself gets thinner, because this is squashed down, and it minimizes this layer. It probably makes it thinner than what we have. Now, I realized right in the beginning, you try to put some paint on this. In fact, let's make a scenario that you wanted to paint right on top of this. The paint comes off almost as easy as that PVA does, because it isn't getting a mechanical tooth. What we have to do, even if we leave that surface layer on, is establish a tooth pattern. And you do that typically with 80 grit paper, so that the cross section of a carbon wheel pant, carbon cowl, carbon anything, in that surface coat, you have a little tooth. Now it allows, whether you're going to use primer is one choice, it allows that primer to get down and get some mechanical tooth. Now that's one way, and when I tried doing it this way in the past, the finish itself was a lot heavier than I wanted. So I found what I thought was an even better way of doing this. And this is the way we're going to use for sure on the A26 and on all the carbon things that we do. And that is, no matter how we make the carbon part, and in this case we did not use the vacuum bag, so we have our carbon sitting here with a layer of actually probably totally raw resin on top. But what I'm going to do now is what I've done in the past. I'm going to sand this down with 80 grit till I actually go down and just touch the fibers of the carbon. Now, in theory, that's going to weaken the part some, but the part is already 25, 30 times stronger than it has to be, so I don't care. I'm going to go down almost into the carbon itself. So what I'll have is, in that final layer, I'm going to get rid of a lot of raw resin when I do the sand out. First I'm going to trim the part and then I'm going to sand it. 80 grit paper is what's recommended. Now from this part, which is going to wind up having a tooth, and a lot of this is typical to the Brodak dope video, very much the same. Now I'm going to put on a couple of coats of clear dope and let them fill the tooth. So now, notice what I've done is I've removed epoxy resin, which is about 4 to 5 times heavier than paint. I've gotten rid of that dead layer of resin, replaced it, and gotten a tooth with clear, but now I really am going to have these little points of carbon sticking up if I'm not careful. And what I found as a solution to that, and it's the best solution for all carbon fiber parts, medium tissue, SGM002. Now the combination of this finish, which is tissue, which is extremely light, with a tooth pattern into the carbon itself, this forms a skin, if you will, that's a fourth the weight of this skin, and I've got a much better tooth. I've got, in this method of doing it, which I'll take full credit for if it works, and I'll say Les did it if it doesn't work, but it's worked well for us in the past. This method is the lightest, just a bit more labor intensive. It's actually only 1 or 2 sand outs more, but that extra skin of tissue means you don't see the little pieces of carbon coming up, or you don't have to deal with fish eyes if you've touched the part with your bare hand or your greasy hand. This is for sure the way we did the Typhoon worked out well, the way we've done the Miss Ashley wing, and I'm going to try to use this method when it comes time to finish the A26. And I'm thinking, as I'm waiting for wax to dry, I'm already picturing in my mind where and how much of that resin I can take off. Now the one thing you really can't do, and I tried this already, so I know it's not a practical thing, is if you have this much, and this is the carbon, and let's just make a fun scenario up, you really can't sand down here to where the fibers cross. You can go a little bit in and cut a little bit because the parts are so overbuilt, but you really can't go down here. The part just gets too flimsy and thin. So this, I think, is going to be the method of choice. This is going to be the method we're not going to try. And the only way I ever found any of this out is by doing the test myself, by making test parts. And you saw how many cowls I made and how many carbon wings we've made, and keeping an accurate track of the weight. And this way, every time I've done it and been real accurate, this way wins big time. So that's the way we're going to go about when it comes time to finish. Now it's time to get some more wax. And again, I'm only putting on a video things I think will help somebody that really wants to do this somewhere down the road, or just wants to watch me suffer one way or the other. Carbon fiber is here to stay. You're not going to live in a world where there's no carbon fiber in the future, so the more familiar I can get with it, the more comfortable I can get working with it, and that means more information I can pass on to the people that enjoy watching the videos. Waxes are drying away, and now I need to pick up this line. Now I'm going to trim this with a parting wheel. That's the way I've found that works the best. First thing is to trim off as many of the loose hairs as possible, because if there's a loose hair like this one, it wraps around the tool and it can pull apart and make a problem for you. So the first thing I always do, carefully look around, get as many of these hairs off as you possibly can. And these are just errant hairs. They still can be a problem if you leave them on. This one is soaked with resin. It won't be a problem, but we'll get rid of it anyway. Another thing too, these make excellent little needles. If you ever want to put one under your fingernail, you want to see how tough you are, just get one under your fingernail. And what I'm going to try to do is, using some masking tape, mask this off, so that I can see that line a little clearer when I actually go to make the cut over by the sanding bench. And this would work whether you're doing a cowling or no matter what part you're using, and you want to get a straight edge. Using masking tape is the best way I know of to do it. It's a good tip, even if it's a wood cowling, and you want to get a straight edge. I don't have to be real fancy about this. But I would like to get right up on the edge, and this just makes it easier for me to see the part, to see where this line is going to be eventually. Whenever I try to do it by eye, especially with my eyes, it can be a little problem. A little bit of a problem. In the case of the blue tape, it's nice because it makes a good contrast. And we're actually going to remove about a 64th of an inch, even more than we need, which is the ridge, because we're going to eventually put a 64th plywood edge on the parts that are going to become hatches, and on the parts that are going to get glued together, we're going to make a little rip, a little kind of a dovetail joint. Now up here I need to make the tape go up, but that's what I'm going to do to use for the little line that I want to use for making that cut. And I'll do that to all the parts. That's where the tape really helps you get a nice fine edge when you're making a cut. And that's the large parting wheel, not the thin one. And the only thing left is to do the other part. Yeah, that's a pretty good way of doing it. I'm real happy with the way that is of establishing that line, because don't forget these two parts have to marry together. Or parts of them, no matter where we're going to make the breaks, we need to get some semblance of a good fix step. I'm going to spend a lot of time today doing this, is I want to take this surface that's way too shiny to accept any kind of a finish. 80 grit paper. 80 grit paper is the part. Now, that's the thing that's difficult here is these razor sharp edges here, and I don't want to get any splinters if possible. But I want to just cut everything down. Let me just show this up close so I can. And I want to get both of the pieces that I just made. I don't want all the scratches going in the same direction. And when I get both parts, have that dull finish, then we'll be ready to start working on them. Now Dave Midgley is bringing down some more material, maybe here today in fact, I don't know. But I have the molds PVA'd and ready to go, so what I can do is I'm going to sand these parts down and then I'll have to wait for the molds. So I want to lay up another set, and then once that set's out of the mold, I want to put this part back in the mold. I don't want to be sitting in the mold while I lay out the formers and the take-apart pieces. So this is going to be a little bit different way than we've done in the past. We haven't used a mold that way in the past, but because this mold hopefully is so accurate, we'll find out how accurate it is. Well, I thought it would be a lot easier than just holding this in your hand and putting formers in it if I can put it back into the mold, and that may be a breakthrough little way of doing it. I don't know, but this finish, getting rid of this finish today, I mean, that finish is real pretty if you're making a surfboard or a boat or anything, but to get that finish right, it is the most important thing, to get rid of that surface layer of resin. That is where just so much of the weight is in there, because it's just raw resin. There's no carbon fibers in it. Anyway, we'll work on doing that today, and if we get the rest of the carbon fiber, we'll be able to lay another set of parts up, but in the meantime, I'm just trying to space out the workday so I can get a lot done on these parts. I'll also try to dress off these edges just a little bit. This is a handy tool, but of course, even handier is that thing from Bob Violet to do the final dressing off on. And whether you're doing wood or carbon fiber, it's always handy to have a piece of sticky back paper on a piece of glass. Just to dress that edge off. We have a little more to go. I can see the shiny spot. Dressing all the edges off. On today's mail, we got some really cool video. This is from our friend Mark Cunningham. He's doing his first Brodak dope finish. He was over at the shop yesterday doing his first Brodak dope finish. He has some pretty unique RC stuff. I thought you'd enjoy a minute or two of this footage while we're sanding out those shells. This is Mark Cunningham.
I love the way it flies that I had to have a bigger one, so I built a very big one, and here it is. It's a 42% quickie. The bottom wing is 71 inches. The top wing is 84 inches. It's 93 inches long. It weighs 19 and a half pounds. And I'm using for power a 3W24, which is a 1.5 gas. It's a great flying airplane. As you can see, I had to split the fuselage. It was so big. But let's put it together and see how it flies. Yeah.
There it is, okay.
Here I am putting the fuselage together. It's pretty easy.
Rods that go through Yep, the gun. See them? And that's it. Pretty good. Oh, that's terrific. Okay. thanks a lot to Ron and to everybody who contributes video. We're basically just going to spend the rest of the night sanding this part out. And believe me, it's a lot more fun watching Ron's video. This is just labor-intensive sanding. Our first part sanded out just completely beautiful, and we are well within the rate that we expected. In fact, we're a little bit on the light side, but once we build this up and get a final sanding in joints, that'll be the final telltale sign as to whether we meet our weight requirement or not here. Like being on Weight Watchers. Anyway, really do enjoy these videos, and thanks to everybody. Just a great way to share the sport that we all love so much. Now we have our first preliminary sanding done, and what I wanted to show is this part has not been wiped down with M600. This one has, or M600 substitute. So getting rid of all of this, what I'll call dust, for lack of a better word. A good wipe down when we're done with M600. And we can be ready that we can actually, as soon as we make up our next set of shells, and we can put these parts in a mold and start laying out the fuse formers, and we will be doing that probably in the next couple of days. Now, among the things that I wanted to work on today, Mike Costello brought over 12 hours of custom painting videotapes that he bought, another set. He's going into custom painting tape business. But what happens is, as I watch these, I watch them while I'm going to be working, doing some other stuff in the shop. If I find any tips, anything that's worth putting on our video, something you can use to, that I think you can use, I hope you can use, it's always good to just make a little mental note of it, and I'll try to include those in on the video, of course. But all these tapes came from Mike Costello. He's basically cornered the market on the internet on making motorcycles and painting and NASCAR paint jobs. And boy, anybody wants copies of these tapes, call Mike Costello. He's got the market cornered. But anyway, we hope we'll be finding some good tips on these. And it looks like they basically do what we do with the masking tape and the fine line tape, and clear the edges and airbrushing. But if we find something that you can use, it's always good to have it. Well, one of the things too today, while we're making these copies for Mike Costello, I had a couple of days ago, I had a special request from Paul Edwards to make him up a top block out of layered material, out of 2 pieces of 16th, so I laid up the shells in this. The other thing that I really didn't think was going to happen, and I was really very surprised, is how many people would be wanting that Strega top block. And it's worked out so well that what I'm going to do later today, sometime today, is I'm going to try to make a double layer piece. We've been making them out of 1/8 inch, but what I want to do is to try to make an even nicer piece. Try to get them out of 2 layers of 16th, make the shells separately, and then after that glue them. Again, we're trying to upgrade stuff as we go along, or give it at least the most amount of options that you can have when you're doing this kind of a project. Now, we've done these a million times on video, but what's nice is by having the 2 layers, especially in the turtle deck shell, you really don't need any formers at all. So we're going to look at doing that later today too. Just a lot of little projects, but I think some of them will be good information you can use in your shop. Now, as I'm working in the shop, just noticing, I know how many people like to do checkerboards on their planes, and this is the kind of checkerboard. If you look at this checkerboard, this is on the video, of course, had to lay out one where the squares aren't exactly square. See in the front how they change? So, again, a lot of this information, it's really great information. I just don't know how much is something that people are going to be really interested in at some point in time. But the checkerboards, I know, is a very common thing. There's, just as an example, the checkerboards Dale Berry has. Dave Fitzgerald has checkerboards. I know Bill Rich, several of planes he had checkerboards. But doing checkerboards, well, we've done them on a Strega video with an ink pen. That's one way. Anybody that's really interested, we can get them a copy of that. And several other times we've done them with ink. But when you want to do them big or in a color other than that you have ink available for, again, the whole idea of this thing is when you see somebody who you can learn from, try to learn from them. That's basically the bottom line. Now I find I've done, probably for 30 years I've been doing airbrush work and painting work and everything, but I still find things I can learn from other people, watching other people, and thank God that they all do make these videos or we'd all be poorer. We can learn from them. Now the problem is these videos Mike bought are really copies of copies of copies. We don't have the original. Now this is one of the things I've been looking forward to, pulling these shells apart. And Chicky is too. He's sitting here just dying to pull it apart. Because we have always made these, or typically made them, I should say. Maybe we did some experimental ones. But this was a special request I had from Paul. And so the thing I remember is, what happens is, it's always best to make the two shells first. In this case, we'll pull these off. And one will fit, of course, right inside the other. They're actually almost stuck together from the ammonia. Now we're going to coat these with some aliphatic resin. We could use epoxy. And we could, if we wanted to, put some half-ounce cloth. I don't think we have to. This is such a small part. And then we're going to put them back together and put them back on the mold. Do is either put some wax paper or some Teflon. This is a sheet of Teflon we put over the mold. What that does, it keeps any of the glue that oozes through or oozes around from sticking to our mold. Now you'll find out if you try to put the aliphatic glue in as you mold the parts, there's something in the ammonia that it doesn't like, and the part really doesn't dry up the way it should. In this case, the other thing that you can do, and Les wanted me to try it on a future part, is simply to thin out the glue with a little bit of water. I guess we could do that right now, but we really don't want to. What Paul is looking for here is a part that he basically doesn't have performers in. And whether he's going to do it, I think you could do it with the 1/8 inch part, but again, anytime the customer wants to do some experimenting, I'm willing to work with him, that's for sure. Something like this I think is always worth giving it a try. Just rub the glue in. Now, the trick here, and you could brush it on, you could, actually another way you could do this would be, just thinking of other things, any of the other glues, Ambroid or glue like the glues that we've used in the past. Elmer's white glue is a good choice. You put one shell right on top of the other. Now, what I'm going to do right now, I don't want to get glue on the outside of that, just use the gloves. Wipe any glue that's on here off. And we're basically back to having the part back on the mold. Make sure they line up as well as we can get them. This will be a question of, from this point on, just wrapping the ace bandage around both parts, compressing both parts. I guess what you could do too is put a piece of saran wrap. I see I've still got a little bit of glue, but we always sand the parts down before we send them out anyway. And this part should be extra stiff and extra strong. Although I don't know how much you gain this way, I'd have to make two parts exactly the same, but it's always good to experiment anyway. And what I want to do is I want to experiment with that Strega part with two pieces of lamination too. In the same way, make the two skins, and then in a second operation, bond them together with some kind of glue, or epoxy, or half-ounce cloth. And I think what happens, you have a shell that's really incredibly strong. It's certainly a lot easier than carving and sanding a top block. Anybody that's not real happy with the idea of spending hour after hour carving and hollowing, especially the hollowing. I think most people don't mind carving as much as hollowing. Just gets frustrating when you go through. And if I may be wrong, but I think it was Al Raby that said at one time, if you don't go through the top block in 3 or 4 places, it isn't light enough. And he's probably right, but if you mold the parts, you really don't have to even worry about it. So tomorrow when we get back here, we'll get a look at what that shell is going to look like. Put it up by the heating vent and let it dry overnight. Now what's funny is, over the years of experimenting with making my own materials and trying to use up different composite materials, combinations, what I found was you can take material like 1/8 ply, and you can make a former, let's just pretend it's any, it really doesn't matter which former it is. 1/8" plywood is a great material. Problem is it is relatively heavy. Now one of the ways you can lighten it up, of course, you can always Swiss cheese it, but then you really do lose a lot of strength. One of the advantages of 1/8" plywood is if you're going to put blind nuts in, where we have take-apart features, the blind nuts really should be mounted in plywood. Now a second lighter choice, and because we're always trying to lighten up this A26, one of the choices I thought of, I can use light ply. Now the light ply, to make the same equivalent part, is a little bit lighter. Blind nuts don't do well in light ply. They tend to pull right through in time. But I could reinforce the corners or the edges or put reinforcements around here if I wanted to make my formers up using light ply. And these would be the fuselage formers, or it wouldn't even matter if they were the formers that go in a crutch or in a motor mount. But there's also a third choice, and I'm going to consider some of the parts, since I know I'm using 1/8". I'm going to make what I call balsa ply. And this is the lightest of all. And what you do is you make the part out of several laminations. In this case, you could make them out of 32nd. You could make it out of 4 laminations. One piece, the grain going in this direction. One piece, the grain going in this direction. And it builds its strength from the grain going in all these different directions. One going in this direction, one going in this direction. You would then have a piece that probably would be just as strong as either one of these. And again, we don't have a real way of measuring it if it doesn't break. But it would also be lighter. It would not be able to hold blind nuts, so we would have to put little reinforcing pieces in, or in some way allow for the blind nuts. But what this is this would be the lightest possible way to make maybe some of the nacelle formers. And again, I haven't even started thinking about it yet. But or the fuselage, the little parts that hold the motor mounts and ultimately attach onto the ring, well, they're on the bottom anyway. We could make parts with 4 layers of grain going in this direction, and probably save some weight over what those parts would be if they were made out of plywood. Again, experimenting with materials is always fun. But always keep in mind, where you get the strength from balsa plywood is the fact that the grains go in opposite directions. You build a lot of strength, and the reason I mention this now is this top block that we have. What I did, I didn't even put it on video, but I laid the grain of each part, the top and the bottom piece, just about 10 degrees off. So one is wrapped in this dimension and one is wrapped in that dimension, just to see how that part would work out. Again, we're always experimenting, always trying new little different things, but this I think is something we're going to try to use, and probably next week or the week after we'll start making the nacelles, but try to include as much balsa ply into the mix. You could also do what Les has done, is put a layer of balsa, some carbon mat, then the balsa going the other way, carbon mat. You can kind of invent your own material, and it's relatively easy to do, inexpensive, and you can always just make the part out of 1/8" plywood first, and then see what the part weighs. See what you're saving. Sometimes you don't save enough that it's even worth the effort. But what will happen in the A26, the formers are going to be relatively big. So to have that piece that big and be able to cut out a lot of the weight in the actual part and then get rid of maybe some hollowing, which we did on the B25, And what I'll do to see that I'm not fooling myself here is I'll take the B25 fuselage off and kind of look at where I hollowed it out and if there are any cracks and maybe where I can hollow it out even more. But the big gain I think is going to come from having some balsa plywood somewhere in that fuselage matrix. I think we're going to try to use a little more balsa plywood with the grain going in opposite directions. Now when I'm molding up that next strag apart, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get 2 pieces of 16th and see how much I can do this so that the grains are just going in just a little bit different direction. Again, I won't know until I make a part like this to see if this is even going to be worth doing. And remember, I have to be able to cover the whole mold area too. So, but even if I can only offset them just a little bit, or if you have 2 pieces of wood, and this could work too, and one has the grain going this way, and you have another piece where the grain is going this way, you can build up a tremendous amount of extra strength with no extra weight. But you don't want to put this one on top of this one so the grains are identical. You want to get dissimilar grain patterns, and I think that's going to be one of the ways we can make these top blocks even a little bit better. As we pull this piece apart, the thing you probably can't do with shells is, for instance, you can't weigh this piece, which is made out of 1/8 inch. So another customer. You can't weigh a piece of 1/8 inch because you could use wood that's 6 pound and wood that's 10 pound, and you wouldn't really get a really fair test unless you cut the wood out of the same block, or maybe we're more accurate about it. I'm not up. That's not my intention is. But I also thought this is something that's worth trying. It's just one of the things that the more I think about it, I mean, we compromise everything in ways that we don't even realize, at least I don't realize anyway. And when you try laminating up some balsa ply, you realize, wow, I could have been using this back in the 50s. Because it's not new technology. It's technology that's been around for a long time. Now it just happens this is the 1/8 inch shell that we're going to try to look at comparing it to. But I don't think it's really relevant to compare the weight. What I really want to do when I lay these 2 pieces out is just when I'm all done compare the strength and see which one is more rigid, maybe a little solider. The thing I found in doing these shells, and boy, these are so nice and light, it's unbelievable. Light and durable. You can drop on a table, doesn't matter. Anyway, not that that's the point. But what will happen is, in time, Paul actually doesn't even have the fuselage made yet. So what he's ordering is shell, and I don't want to happen is I don't want this to expand by the time he actually gets to use it. So what I found as a good way to do this is just put it under a little bit of tension. If you're going to store a shell, whether you